Okay, so get this. Could one person's vision for, a just society have actually prevented a civil war?
Hmm.
I mean, that's what we're going to try and unpack today.
Wow.
As we kind of dive into the surprisingly radical views of a prominent abolitionist.
Yeah, it really is fascinating how history remembers some figures while others kind of fade into obscurity, even when their ideas were groundbreaking for their time.
Totally. And today's deep dive is all about uncovering one of those, those hidden stories.
Yeah.
We're looking at an excerpt from The Secret History of Racism in America, What They Don't Want You to Know, which with the title like that,
Right.
we're in for some serious myth busting.
It's important to approach sources like this critically. Analyze the claims, look at the evidence presented, and ultimately draw our own conclusions.
Absolutely. So this excerpt really dives into this question. Was there a big player in the fight against slavery before Lincoln stepped onto the scene?
Yeah.
And if so, why don't we know more about him?
It speaks to the power of dominant narratives in history. Whose stories get told and whose get left out often reflects the power dynamics of the time.
Okay, to really get into this, imagine yourself transported back to 1844. A presidential nomination convention is going down in Illinois.
Okay.
And amidst all the typical political back and forth, this charismatic figure takes the stage. But instead of the usual stump speech, he delivers this, fiery call for racial equality and civil rights, demanding an end to slavery.
What's remarkable here is that he was challenging a system so deeply entrenched in the fabric of American society.
Right.
Remember, slavery wasn't just a moral issue.
Mm-hmm.
It was the economic engine of the nation.
And he didn't shy away from that, did he? The excerpt quotes him directly, saying, "My cogitations, like Daniel's, have for a long time troubled me when I view the condition of men throughout the world, and more especially in this boasted realm where the Declaration of Independence holds these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. But at the same time, some 2 or 3 millions of people are held as slaves for life because the spirit in them is covered with a darker skin than ours."
Wow.
I mean, that's laying it on the line.
Yeah.
In a way that was incredibly risky back then.
He's calling out the hypocrisy.
Yeah.
At the core of the American experiment.
Yeah.
How can a nation founded on the ideals of liberty and equality justify the brutal oppression of an entire race of people based solely on the color of their skin?
It's mind-blowing to think about how much courage it must have taken to stand up and say that in that environment.
Yeah.
And he went on to advocate for a full abolishment of slavery by 1850. That wasn't just some distant goal. This was a call for immediate radical change.
And his proposed method is fascinating, too.
Oh, yeah.
He wasn't just about moral condemnation.
Okay. He suggested a pragmatic approach, using surplus revenue from public land sales, reducing congressional salaries to compensate slaveholders for their so-called property.
Wow.
He wanted to dismantle the institution of slavery while addressing the economic anxieties of those who profited from it.
So we have this bold vision laid out, right? A plan for a more just and unified nation. But here's the tragic part. Just 1 month after delivering this powerful message, this champion of freedom was assassinated. It really makes you wonder, who was this person who dared to speak truth to power in such a volatile time?
It underscores the very real dangers faced by those who dared to challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
Especially when that status quo was upheld by a powerful economic system.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, this has got to be Lincoln, right? He's the one we all associate with ending slavery. But think back to Lincoln's early stance on slavery. In his first inaugural address, he actually stated he had no intention of interfering with it where it already existed. A far cry from the immediate and complete abolition our speaker was calling for. Yeah, this is crucial to understanding the diverse landscape of the abolitionist movement. It wasn't a monolithic force.
Right.
There were varying opinions on the best way to achieve the goal of ending slavery, with some taking a more gradualist approach, while others, like our mystery figure, demanded immediate and radical change.
Okay. I've kept you in suspense long enough. Are you ready for the big reveal?
Oh, I'm definitely curious to learn the identity of this courageous individual.
The man who delivered that powerful speech and met such a tragic end was General Joseph Smith, Jr.
Joseph Smith,
Oh.
as in the founder of Latter-day Saint movement.
Yes, that Joseph Smith. I don't know about you, but I was totally floored when I learned this. It definitely shattered my own preconceived notions about him.
It's amazing how we can box historical figures into these neat categories based on, a single aspect of their lives, overlooking the complexity of their beliefs and actions.
So why don't we hear more about Joseph Smith's abolitionist views? To understand that, we need to take a closer look at the economic realities of America in the mid-1800s.
This is where the context gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Slavery wasn't just a moral stain on the nation. It was woven into the very financial systems of the country.
The excerpt goes into detail about how these so-called property banks actually thrived on the slave trade and the displacement of indigenous communities.
These institutions, like the Second Bank of the United States, were deeply complicit in the perpetuation of slavery.
Right.
They directly profited from the sale and trade of enslaved people, even accepting them as collateral for loans, further entrenching the system.
Wow.
And it wasn't just a Southern problem either.
Right. Northern businesses and even European investors were deeply involved. They bought and sold slave mortgages and bonds, fueling this cycle of exploitation. So when Joseph Smith called for an end to slavery, he wasn't just taking a moral stance, he was threatening the economic engine of the nation.
And that's why his call for abolition was so dangerous.
Yeah.
He was challenging not just a social norm, but a powerful economic system with tentacles that reached far beyond the South.
Exactly. He was going up against a system that benefited a lot of powerful people, making his stance incredibly radical and risky for the time.
It's a testament to his courage and conviction that he was willing to take on such a powerful and deeply entrenched system, even in the face of such great personal risk.
And tragically, that risk ultimately cost him his life.
Yeah.
But his message lived on, didn't it?
Absolutely.
His ideas,
Yeah.
his willingness to challenge the status quo helped pave the way for future generations of abolitionists.
His story is a powerful reminder that, progress often comes at a steep price.
Yeah.
And the fight for justice rarely goes unchallenged.
It really makes you question how we remember historical figures, right, and their legacies.
Yeah.
It's easy to simplify narratives,
Right.
but the reality is often far more complex and nuanced.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons this deep dive is so fascinating.
Yeah.
It challenges us to look beyond the surface, to question what we think we know and to consider alternative perspectives.
And what's so compelling about this particular story is that it highlights like a hidden chapter in the history of the abolitionist movement. It's a chapter that, many people, myself included, were completely unaware of.
It also makes you wonder about, the stories that are still waiting to be uncovered.
Right.
How many other individuals fought for justice and equality, but were forgotten or marginalized by the historical record?
That's a great question, and it brings up another important point. The way history is written, who gets remembered and celebrated often reflects the power dynamics of the time.
It's a constant reminder that we need to approach history with a critical eye, always asking ourselves, whose voices are being amplified?
Right.
And whose are being silenced?
So if this story happened nearly 2 centuries ago, why should we care about it today? What can we learn from Joseph Smith's fight for abolition?
Well, his story compels us to question the narratives we've been taught and to seek a more comprehensive understanding of the past. His actions demonstrate the power of moral courage and the importance of challenging systems that perpetuate inequality.
Yeah.
And his vision, his unwavering belief in a just and unified nation, it resonates even today.
Yeah, one thing that struck me about the excerpt was this emphasis on unity. Like, he wasn't just advocating for an end to slavery.
Right.
He was calling for a society where people of all races could truly live together in peace and harmony. It was a message of reconciliation and healing, delivered decades before the Civil War ripped the nation apart.
That's a powerful observation.
Yeah.
His vision wasn't just about dismantling a system of oppression. It was about creating a new one, a system based on equality and mutual respect.
Yeah.
And it begs the question, what if his message had reached a wider audience? What if more people had embraced his vision?
Right.
Could it have changed the course of history?
I mean, that's a really intriguing what if. Could a vision of unity and justice have prevented the bloodshed and division of the Civil War? I mean, it's impossible to say for sure, but it certainly highlights the potential power of ideas and the impact of, courageous leadership.
It also challenges us to think about the role of visionaries and reformers, in shaping the course of history.
Yeah.
Often their ideas are met with resistance, even ridicule, but their courage and conviction can plant the seeds for profound social change.
The excerpt also points out how powerful language can be when used to advocate for change. Joseph Smith's speeches were full of vivid imagery and powerful rhetoric.
Right.
He used phrases like dungeon glooms and shackles from the poor black man to evoke the horrors of slavery, and contrasted that with his vision of a nation where the very name of American is fraught with friendship. It was both poetic and deeply persuasive.
His ability to connect with people on an emotional level, to paint a picture of both the darkness of slavery and the possibility of a brighter future, was incredibly effective.
It makes you realize that words have power.
Yeah.
And that those who can wield them effectively can truly make a difference.
Absolutely. Language can inspire, motivate, and challenge. It can change hearts and minds. And as Joseph Smith's story demonstrates, it can even change the course of history.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm feeling like a renewed sense of responsibility to engage with history, to uncover the untold stories, and to learn from those who fought for justice and equality. It's been a real journey exploring this, and honestly, this deep dive into Joseph Smith's abolitionist views has challenged some of my own assumptions about American history.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, myself included, tend to have this simplified view of the abolitionist movement, but clearly there's so much more to uncover.
It just goes to show, right, that there are always layers to history,
Uh-huh.
often hidden beneath the surface of the dominant narratives.
Right.
And the more we learn, the more nuanced and complete our understanding of the past becomes.
It's like we're piecing together a giant puzzle, and every new discovery adds another piece to the picture. And sometimes those pieces come from the most unexpected places.
Yeah.
Like this story about Joseph Smith.
Exactly. We often compartmentalize historical figures,
Right.
focusing on one aspect of their lives or legacy. But the reality is people are complex, their motivations are layered, and their actions can have ripple effects that extend far beyond their immediate context.
So what would you say is the biggest takeaway from this deep dive?
Mm.
What's the one thing you hope listeners walk away thinking about?
I think the most important takeaway is this, and to embrace the complexity of history.
Yeah.
It's in those unexplored corners, those hidden stories, that we often find the most profound insights and lessons.
I completely agree. And for anyone listening who's, feeling inspired to dig a little deeper into this themselves, where would you suggest they start?
Well, the excerpt we've been discussing today is a great starting point, but I would encourage listeners to go beyond that. Explore primary sources, read biographies, and delve into the rich historical scholarship that exists on this topic.
Mm-hmm.
There are countless resources available online and in libraries.
Like an adventure.
Yeah.
Right. And speaking of adventures, we started this deep dive with a question. Could Joseph Smith's vision for a just and unified America have changed the course of history, if he had lived? What are your final thoughts on that?
It's a question that sparks so much speculations, right?
Yeah.
And invites us to consider the what-ifs of history.
Right.
Could his vision, had it been more widely embraced, have prevented the Civil War? Could it have led to a more just and equitable society?
Yeah.
We can never know for sure.
Right.
But what we can do is learn from his courage, his conviction, and his unwavering belief in the possibility of a better world.
Yeah.
And perhaps by carrying those values forward in our own lives, we can create a future that reflects the ideals he so passionately championed.
That's a powerful thought to end on. Thanks for taking this deep dive with me.
It was a pleasure.
And to all of you listening, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.